right, you guys, welcome. Happy to have everybody here. I'm not sure if people will join, but I don't know if we've had the conversation yet, but this is kind of intended to be just something that you can participate in if you're available, but it's also something that's going to be recorded and available to you later. So if as we'll add people as they kind of join on, and it seems like everybody here has used Zoom before, so there's not really any instruction to kind of go through. There's the chat if you want to chat, or just unmute yourself and say some words if you want to. So really, this is the first time that we're doing the virtual class for the new wine club, which is super exciting, just because it allows us to kind of see each other without being with each other, which, you know, COVID and all is a good thing. So you can kind of see the agenda here on the screen. There's a couple of housekeeping things that I want to talk about as it pertains to wine club and how to access the video and the text sheet. So in the box that you received should be something that, let me go over here. If you did the three wines, not all red, but the mix, you should have 3 text sheets that came in your box, and in the bottom corner is a QR code that came with each printout. If you scan that QR code, it's going to take you to the Vinovium website, where there is a digital copy of this, also with the video that we're creating today. So essentially what's going to happen is we're going to do this class, and then I'm going to take apart the sections about Viognier and the Ocotillo and the Cab Franc, and then those video portions will live independently according to the wine on the website. And so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to share my screen with you. That way you know how to access that, just in case you throw these away, which if you do, recycle them. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen, and then we'll kind of jump into topics that we're going to talk about and follow the agenda. But before we do that, I want to make sure you understand how to get to the information about the wine. And everyone, you know, there's been a lot of comments about the website. The website eventually will be changing to better reflect kind of where Vinovium is and where it's going. Hopefully you can see my screen at the moment. I'm going to pull up a website, pull up Vinovium. Okay, so what I did just temporarily until we figure out the best place for this to live is, if you, either way, whether you go to wines, there's now a new drop down for wines called wine releases, or if you get to it from the wines here in the main navigation bar and you click on that, it'll say wine releases. And here are basically the 3 wines that we're talking about today. And the video, like I'm saying, the video coming soon will be based off of the video that we're creating today. So that video will live here based off of that topic that we're going to talk about. So if you click on download text sheet, it'll basically take you to the exact same thing that you got in your shipment. And then you could download that, whatever you want to do. You could share it, whatever. So that'll live forever on the website, and then we'll kind of just add on as we go through the years here. And then the other thing I was going to say is, let's say you go to wines and you don't go to wine releases. Eventually what's going to end up happening is all the wines that are currently on the website will have the same information. So if you go to the product page for each individual wine, that information will eventually also live on this page, or there'll be a link to that information. So you should be able to get to the text sheet information for every release going forward from the individual product page or from the wine release page. And the wine release page, again, is wines, wine releases, super simple. All right, you guys, so we're going to go through 3 wines. I sent out an email, obviously, with the login information and to kind of get into the Zoom meeting, but part of that email was also kind of what's the expectation for these virtual classes. It's not fair for us to ask you to open every single wine that we release for these classes. And I know that when COVID round 1 happened, that a lot of the wineries were doing virtual classes and virtual tastings, and they would send you 3, 4, 5 wines. And the expectation was to open all those wines to participate in the tasting. I don't expect you to do that. Even if you don't want to drink the wines, this is really meant to create content that can be accessed in the future. If you want to open all 3 wines, fantastic. We're going to taste all 3 wines, or at least I'm going to walk you through my tasting of all 3 wines. We're going to talk about kind of the context behind each wine. But really, it's not intended for you to, unless you want to, again, open all 3 wines just because we're doing a virtual class. So that being said, if you are drinking wines today, or one of the wines that came in the shipment, we may all be drinking different wines. I'm going to start with the Viognier. Feel free to join me if that wine is open for you. If not, just open something, drink something, even if it's Scotch, because if I weren't doing this, I'd probably be drinking Scotch also. All right, and let's go ahead and start. So we have an agenda for the day. I did want to welcome everybody. There is an introduction about Viognier. We'll do a little background on Viognier, kind of the history of Viognier, the lineage of Viognier, kind of varietal characteristics. We'll talk about High Cross Vineyard specifically, which is where this Viognier comes from. Erica and Cam Campbell are the owners of High Cross Vineyard, and they tried to join us today, but they're unable because they are harvesting this Viognier that we're drinking tonight, so that we can press it tomorrow. And I'll be actually going over to West Cape Cellars tomorrow to press Viognier. And obviously, if you hear Nacho in the background, it's because he insists on being a part of every single class that I do. And I apologize. He has his moments of being hangry, and I think this may be one of the moments. So then we'll actually talk about to kind of follow up or finish the Viognier section. We'll look. When I was in Condrieu, the Northern Rhone, several years back, 2016, which I miss so dearly. We'll look at a video that I created that is kind of so you can see the terrain and the topography of where the home of Viognier comes from. And then we'll do an introduction about Ocotillo, like why the name Ocotillo, what's the history of that brand, kind of what's the makeup of the brand of the wine in the 2018 vintage, and really what's the style of wine based off of, which is this idea of a Super Tuscan, and what's the history behind Super Tuscan. And then we'll finish with the Cabernet Franc. Obviously, this is a non-Texas wine, so it's important for us to talk about why we produce non-Texas wines, and also kind of from there, we'll talk about the varietal characteristics, the winery partnership that we have in Lodi to produce this wine. And then we'll finish with a little bit of Q&A if you have any questions. And then we'll talk about the next round of public virtual classes with Mark Rayshap. And I did an interview with him yesterday, and I'll show you that video so you can meet Mark. And then we'll talk about the classes that we're going to be featuring in the next 3 classes, virtual wine classes, starting in August. Okay, and then the last one to finish with is the Cabernet Franc. And those of you that participated in the first round of COVID classes that I taught, Cabernet Franc was one of the wines that we had talked about. Although we had tasted a Cabernet Franc from the Loire Valley, the home of Cabernet Franc. And when we talk about Cabernet Franc, it is a very old varietal. Thank you. It's an old varietal that is actually, in terms of its lineage and parentage, here's a good, I mean, we can go back to that other website. I just wanted to show you that in case you were interested in that, but this is a much more simplified version of the lineage of Cabernet Franc. But Cabernet Franc, while we think is a French varietal, actually comes from northern Spain in the Basque country, where what is believed is the parentage of Cabernet Franc is 2 grapes. One is called Morenoa and Honorapi Beltza. And Honorapi Beltza is one of your classic varietals for a very famous wine coming from the Basque region called Chacoli. Morenoa, I've never seen a wine with that, so I don't even know if that's a varietal that's turned into a wine these days. But we believe that that's the parentage of Cabernet Franc. And then the story goes, as many of you have heard, is that Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon Blanc then produced Cabernet Sauvignon. And so the Cabernet Franc, in terms of a varietal, is one of these varietals that produces a chemical in it called pyrazine, which is unique to the entire Cabernet family. And what pyrazine is, pyrazine is this bell pepper component. So in its worst case, if those of you that have had New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs, that cat pea, bell pepper, asparagus, jalapeno character is like the cool climate, cool fermentation, perfect example of what a pyrazine is. So Cab Franc as a varietal, it is a varietal that uniquely is itself in terms of that pyrazinic character, but in addition, it is kind of the true color of cherry. It's the true flavor of cherry, but it also has kind of a uniqueness to it, which is kind of this herbalness. And that herbalness comes off on many levels as one, bell pepper, kind of black tea, eucalyptus, Earl Grey. For me, I get a lot of Kalamata olives, almost like wild mushroom component. It is kind of an earthbound, cherried, medium-bodied, high-acid, moderate tannin style wine. And then as you move it from its climate, which the home of the Cabernet Franc is Loire Valley, which is a relatively cool climate. As you move it from its cool climate to a warmer climate, that pyrazinic character becomes riper. You're going from like green bell pepper to red bell pepper. You're going from kind of this softer style of wine to a little bit more fruited wine. You're getting fuller bodied. So it's a wine that is really really shows its climate, both in terms of temperature and growing season. And I use temperature and growing season as kind of the effects are the same. The warmer the growing area, you produce riper character, but you have the opportunity to produce balanced wine in a much more kind of shorter window. Versus if you are in a growing season that has a longer growing season, you can produce that same style of wine. You just have more opportunity for success just because your window of your growing season is longer. So what we'll see with the Cabernet Franc that we're going to taste, it's one of these wines that's kind of a hybrid. It's both from a warm climate and a cool climate. Warm days, cool nights, long growing season. So we get intensity of color, a lot of extraction, intensity of flavor, and it also still tends to be super high in acid. And it's for this reason why this Cab Franc is, for many people, kind of a weird wine. For me, it's a wine that definitely needs food. Let me grab it so I can taste it. It's a wine that definitely needs food because that acid profile, particularly on the back end, is lending to something more than just what's on the fruitiness side of the wine. So obviously, if you're looking at the wine, it's dark cherry. It's almost opaque. You can't really see through it. Kind of a unique expression of Cabernet Franc just right out of the gate based off of its color. I typically don't expect this much color from Cabernet Franc. And when you smell it, it's got this intense blue and black licorice anise kind of fruit character. There's some savoriness there, almost like a hoisin sauce, kind of umami, almost like a sauteed mushroom component. And then when you taste it, the wine is fruity up front, but you would expect the wine to kind of deliver more body than what it's giving you. Cabernet Franc is never going to be as full-bodied as a Merlot, which means it's never going to be as full-bodied as a Cab. And so it's kind of in this weird body range, which makes it more versatile for food. And also the acid profile is high, particularly on that back end. And so as a result, this is also one of these wines, just like the Ocotillo, that is really complementary to food. Those of you that have come to the tasting room and had this wine, it's a wine that some people love, some people don't love. And unfortunately, it's one of these wines that just needs a meal to it. Here's a grape leaf for you. These are kind of duplicates from the class that I taught earlier in March, April. Kind of like what you expect a grape leaf to look like. So globally, when we talk about Cab Franc, Cab Franc is one of these varietals that's in the top 20 most planted varietals in the world. In terms of wine grapes, there's a lot of grapes that are just considered table grapes that are more planted than any other wine grape. But in terms of wine grapes, Cabernet Franc is definitely one of the most planted grapes in the world. In total, there's about 123,000, give or take, acres of Cabernet Franc planted in the world. In Texas, there's 140 acres, just because I'm not sure why. I think probably when we look at kind of the oldest vines in Texas, it's definitely Cabernet Sauvignon. So I think it's just a parallel there or a progression there. California, 3,400 acres of Cabernet Franc. France obviously is the most planted region in the world for Cabernet Franc with 88,000 acres. Italy comes in second in the world with 17,000 acres. The U.S. totals about 3,500 acres. So typically we see Cabernet Franc quite a bit in the Finger Lakes, kind of the Northeast area. We see it quite a bit in Washington these days. And then it's part of the Bordeaux blend. So you tend to see it quite a bit in the Napa Valley as a result of that style of wine. In Texas, there's not a lot of 100% Cab Franc, although those of you that have tasted the rosé that we produced over the last couple of years is 100% Cab Franc rosé. West Cape Cellars is making 100% Cab Franc red wine, and I think there's some here and there. Typically, it's part of blends, though. So for us, obviously, this is a non-Texas wine, and those that know the story of why we produce non-Texas wines, it's a direct byproduct of when we started the winery, which was in 2012, with the first vintage of being 2013. That was the year that Texas in 2013 had 5 frosts in the first 2 weeks of May. And any fruit that we contracted or any relationships that we had to produce Texas wines for us, we lost all that fruit. There was no Texas fruit in 2013. There was no Texas fruit in 2014. 2015 was really the first year. That was also the year that the drought ended. And so really that's when we started to see our first really unique wines produced for Vinovium in the Vinovium fashion in 2015. So we kind of, and then some of you also know that we didn't start out life here at 214 Edmonds Avenue. We moved here in 2016 and spent the first 4.5 years in Lakeway, Texas, did not have a tasting room, and strictly kegged wines for restaurants and wine bars and hotels and caterers. And so we really started the winery with a lot of non-Texas wines. And over the years, we've kind of kept some of these wines because they've helped build our wholesale program. And so today we produce really 5 non-Texas wines compared to, 13, 14, 15 other Texas wines, depending on the season. And so we've kind of continued this. This was a wine that really wasn't meant to be released to the consuming public. This was a wine that we brought in strictly for wholesale, but with everything that has happened with COVID, it had no choice but to come into the tasting room. And while I love Cab Franc, I feel like this Cab Franc is a wine that has created some division. Some people love it. Like I said, some people hate it. But with food, it's got a lot of opportunity for pairing points. But our partner for this is a winery in Lodi called Miramont Estate. Miramont Estate is a winery that was planted in 1998. So they're celebrating, 22 years, 21 years now as an estate vineyard. The Peachin family, the Peachin family has roots that go back to the Central Valley in terms of farming since the 1840. So they've had continuous farming culture and heritage in the kind of Central Valley, Lodi area for quite a long time. And then the vineyard itself was planted in 98, and it tends to produce really unique wines for their area, considering that as we go into Lodi, as you go from the western part of Lodi to the eastern part of Lodi, you have kind of extremes in terms of your climate. And I'll pull up a map here to kind of reiterate this point. Let me get rid of these guys. So here's a map of Lodi, and I'll zoom it in. Basically, Lodi is a growing area that sits on the foothills of the Sierra Mountains. And the Sierra Mountains, as you go from, as you get closer into the Sierra Mountains, you're much hotter. But what's unique about Lodi is it basically sits 90 to 100 miles directly due east of San Francisco. And you have this river delta system that brings cool air into the region, and therefore you're able to produce wines that mimic a cooler region when in reality you're in what you would think would be a warmer growing area. And Miramont Estate is kind of here in the south, kind of in Leachin, California, just basically east of Stockton. And we produce a style of wine that is unique. Unique in the sense that it has really high temperature during the day, low temperature at night, and we produce these wines that have intense color with really bright acidity without all the body that you would expect from a warmer growing season or a warmer growing climate. Yeah, so kind of wrap up the Cabernet Franc. I mean, it's a cool climate, Lodi, California. There's history there with the winery in terms of why we produce it. But the vineyard now is 22 years old, 100% estate, Lodi fruit from Miramont Estate. The wine itself, in terms of how it's produced, this wine is probably it's harvested early to mid-September, and the intense fruitiness suggests that the wine is not overly oaked, or if it is oaked, it's 100% neutral oak because there's nothing really oaky on the wine, but it tends to have this kind of savory, umami kind of hoisin Worcestershire sour sauce thing happening in terms of its acid structure, which lends itself to some really unique pairing points. On the text sheet that I wrote, things like camembert, blue cheese, stewed mushrooms, eggplant, dried dates, and now we got to add Peking duck to it, or non-Peking duck with Asian 5-spice with an orange glaze, smoked for 6 hours on a Traeger grill, to be exact. I'm happy to be able to finally do this first virtual class with the wine club. I think it's going to grow. Ever since we launched the new wine club, we've had nothing but really positive feedback from everybody in terms of the quality of the club, the value of the club, and the idea of creating more educational opportunities for people. So it's exciting to be able to introduce not only new classes, but also new educators and new personalities to the family that we call the Vonovia membership. And we hope that it continues, and we hope that you're having a good time and that you share it with people. There's no reason why you can't drink 3 wines with your buddies. You just need to invite them over. Or I can invite them over for you, and you may not know them. So, guys, I really appreciate your time today. Look forward to segments of this being on the website. If you missed any of Julia's classes, all of those classes are currently on YouTube, except for the first class where we had some technical difficulties. But the wines on the Shades of Rosé class, the wines on the Republic of Georgia are all on there. And to kind of summarize kind of where we are today with the business, you guys are more than welcome to come here. We do have spots on the deck where you can be that are on non-permanent property. If you need to use the restroom when you come in here, you're more than welcome to use the restroom. But right now, TABC does not want us serving any of the cocktails or by the glass. However, you can buy the bottle and hang out on the non-permanent portions of the property. And we're trying to figure out how to make more non-permanent property possible on the deck and possibly inside. And then if you haven't heard, the Friday meals have been doing really quite well, where every Friday we're offering a different meal that comes with wine that you can either pick up or hang out and picnic with. Alrighty. I appreciate everybody's time. Thank y'all so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening. We'll see y'all soon. Ciao.